Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lean Green Michigan's EV Charging webinar. We're really happy all of you guys could join us today. Just to go over a brief agenda, the webinar will consist of a brief overview and introductions from myself, followed by presentations from Christian Koch and Todd Williams. Once presentations conclude, we'll open up a Q&A to all members of the audience. So at Lean Green Michigan, we have a 4-person team who consists of Todd Williams, our president and general counsel, Mary Freeman, our owner and head of outreach, John Wiley, our associate counsel, and myself, Megan Ross. I'm the communications and business associate. So just to give a brief refresher of PACE, which is defined as the Property Assessed Clean Energy Act, established in Michigan in 2010, PACE is a financing tool that enables cash flow positive investment in comprehensive energy efficiency, water efficiency, and renewable energy projects. At Lean Green Michigan, we work as a third-party administrator of PACE on behalf of our member jurisdictions. We currently serve 51 counties, cities, and townships in Michigan, comprising of over 74% of Michiganders. Our speakers today will include Christian Koch, who is the Director of Legislative Affairs at the Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council, along with Lean Green Michigan's President and General Counsel, Todd Williams. And with that, I'll hand it over to Christian.
Excellent. Thank you, Megan. And hello, everyone. My name is Christian Koch, and I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs with Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council. First of all, I'd like to thank Lean Green Michigan for inviting me to speak today, just to share a bit more about what's going on in Michigan as it relates to EVs and EV charging policy. As you can imagine, there's, of course, a lot going on right now. Right now is a very critical moment for the future of EVs and EV infrastructure. The EV market is continuing to expand across the country and across Michigan. And right now, programs and funding from the federal and state government are helping to push these efforts. So really, I think that the topic of this webinar is very timely, and I'm glad to see that Lean Green Michigan is promoting the use of PACE to finance EV charging infrastructure. And as we'll see from my presentation, now is really the time to start thinking about getting real and investing in EV charging infrastructure across all properties. So just to give a quick intro to what Michigan EIBC is, our mission is to grow Michigan's advanced energy economy by fostering opportunities for innovation and business growth and offering a unified voice in creating a business-friendly environment for the advanced energy in Michigan. Next slide, please. And in addition to Michigan EIBC, I also work for the Institute for Energy Innovation. The Institute for Energy Innovation is a Michigan-based nonprofit that works to promote a greater public understanding of advanced energy and its economic potential for Michigan, and to inform the policy and public discussion on Michigan's energy policy challenges and opportunities. We have about 15 companies are part of our leadership council. Next slide. And as you'll see, we have many other members that are also working in the solar space, EV charging infrastructure, and energy storage. So, across 140 member companies, we're doing quite a bit of work here. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Michigan EIBC is a trade association representing a range of Michigan advanced energy industries. So therefore, much of our work does include doing policy advocacy on the state level to help advance EVs and EV charging infrastructure. Since 2018, we have done 13 EV convenings, basically bringing EV companies, policymakers, and other stakeholders to the table to push for EV expansion across Michigan. We regularly intervene in Michigan Public Service Commission rate cases, and basically help to steer and support and shape EV utility programs. And much of our work also includes policy advocacy, where we advocate on behalf of our member companies. For example, some of the work that we've been doing on the EV side is basically to intervene in building code updates and really trying to push for EV readiness within updating building codes, and to support EV charging infrastructure and investments in the budget process too. Next slide, please. So in recent years, Michigan has made great strides in expanding its EV charging infrastructure across both public and private assets, as well as its amount of registered electric vehicles. But Michigan still has much room for improvement, both in terms of how accommodating the state is for EVs and EV charging infrastructure, but as well as how accessible charging infrastructure is. Right now, much of Michigan's charging is located around Southeast Michigan and around other pockets across the state with some prominent dead zones. Next slide. In 2020, Governor Whitmer announced a set of executive orders that initiated and began implementation for the My Healthy Climate Plan, which included a key goal of getting 2 million EVs on Michigan roads by 2030. To accomplish this, the My Healthy Climate Plan outlined key strategies to include purchase incentives such as rebates for electric vehicles and EV charging infrastructure, as well as for more broader transportation planning. But even though this is a great goal, we will still need about 10,000 level 3 and 90,000 level 2 chargers across Michigan to support 2 million EVs by 2030. And we'll need to also increase clean energy transportation by about 15% each year. So still a bit of work to go there. But luckily, last year, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, enacted as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is basically helping to make historic investments in EV charging infrastructure. Part of this investment involves the development of the NEVI, or the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, which provides funding to states to strategically deploy EV charging infrastructure and establish basically a interconnected charging network. And through NEVI, Michigan will receive about $110 million over the next 5 years, with 110 million over the next 5 years, with $16.3 million being available for fiscal year 2022. Michigan's NEVI rollout plan is being coordinated by the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. Next slide, please. So Michigan's NEVI rollout plan. So for the past couple of months, or really the past year, the state departments, especially the Michigan Department of Transportation, EGLE, the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, have been doing a lot of modeling that to account for Michigan's travel data, its energy system capacity, and its overall EV market needs too, to basically get a better understanding of how they can roll out their NEVI plan. And then the second step in Michigan's NEVI rollout process is that by August 1st, all states applying for NEVI must develop and submit their infrastructure deployment plan to the federal government's new Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. I think about 15 to 20 states have already submitted their infrastructure deployment plans, and Michigan is still working on submitting theirs. Once the infrastructure deployment plans are approved, states can then access full NEVI resources and begin the state implementation process to build out alternative fuel corridors across the state. And NEVI also does include discretionary grants, such as $2.5 billion in grants, with $1.25 billion for corridor charging infrastructure, and to expand community charging infrastructure as well. Next slide, please. So this is a map of Michigan's current EV charging model. And as you can see, most of Michigan's EV charging is located around our main highway corridors across I-75, 127. So you can go to the next slide. And with basic NEVI guidance, so states are required to fulfill their NEVI plans by following a basic set of rules. For NEVI guidance, all EV charging stations must be publicly accessible. They must be built out every 50th mile along alternative fuel corridors, located within 1 mile of the transportation network. And federal funds from NEVI cost share about 80% of a NEVI project. And there's also minimal charging capabilities that need to be met with NEVI funding also. So 4 or more 150 DCFC charging stations capable of charging 4 electric vehicles, as well as one 600 kilowatt hour charging station that can charge at least 150 kilowatt hours per port simultaneously across 4 charging infrastructures. So there is some good guidance coming from the federal government. So even though Michigan has not submitted its NEVI rollout plan yet, this is a map that outlines considerations for alternative fuel corridor nominations through the NEVI plan. As you can see, a lot of the NEVI infrastructure for EV charging infrastructure through NEVI are located primarily along US 31, 131, 127, and then also with a lot of charging investments along I-69 and I-94 there too. But in addition to federal policy and federal investments, the Michigan legislature, just before they went on summer recess in June, they did pass a $76 billion budget for fiscal year 2023. So even though there's a lot of good work or a lot of funding for energy efficiency measures, for weatherization assistance, and for an energy efficiency revolving fund, there unfortunately wasn't a whole lot of investments through the budget process for EV charging infrastructure. I think that the most notable item was that the fiscal year 2023 budget did include $130 million for the development of an EV deployment center at the University of Michigan, which also helped to retain Michigan's workforce as it pertains to EV charging infrastructure and building out Michigan's EV market. So even though there's a $76 billion fiscal year budget for 2023, there is also $7 billion left on the state budget, in which case Michigan EIBC, as well as many of our other partners, will be advocating for additional items within the supplemental budget process. I think that one of the most notable policy proposals that we are advocating for, and which was actually on the governor's executive budget, was a $50 million rebate program that would deliver $2,000 for the purchase of a new electric vehicle and $500 rebate for the purchase of an at-home charging equipment for a new or used EV. So the details there will be fought out over the next couple of months, but like I said, we're of course going to be pushing for that supplemental budget there too. And of course, there's a lot of activity going on in the legislative process also. House Bills 4803 and 4804 allow for EV charging infrastructure at rest stops or travel information centers, and those were introduced and referred to the House Committee on Energy back in May. House Bill 5391 require new parking lots and also require other alterations to parking lots to include a certain proportion of spots to be installed with level 2 charging infrastructure. That bill was introduced in October of 2021. House Bill 65-4, Senate Bill 1017. So I mentioned the supplemental budget process and the proposal for an EV rebate program. So basically, what these two bills do is that these bills would allow that policy proposal to come to fruition. So with that being said, if the supplemental budget process does not include the EV rebate language for $2,000 for plug-in hybrid vehicles and $500 credits for EV charging infrastructure, unfortunately, these bills would be essentially meaningless. So it kind of shows how the legislative process and the budget process do definitely go hand in hand. As I said, is something that we're going to continue to advocate for. Then there was also recently a introduction for an EV tax credit bill. But the last thing I have on my legislative slide here is that next year it's very likely that Michigan will be undergoing an energy rewrite, where basically it's something that the Michigan legislature and Michigan policymakers do about once every 6 to 8 years. And the last one was done, I believe, in 2016, where Michigan lawmakers basically open up a docket and reassess every piece of policy, every legislation that touches energy. So there's gonna be a lot of exciting energy policy topics on the table. Assuming that the energy rewrite happens, it's not a for sure thing yet. I think it's likely to happen next year if the governor does get reelected, and if she doesn't, it's possible it could be kicked out the following year. It's typically something that second-term governors do. But regardless, the energy rewrite, when it happens, will be a big opportunity to invest in EV charging infrastructure, especially since in 2016, there was really nothing in the energy rewrite then had to do with EV charging infrastructure. So again, just a big opportunity there. Next slide. All right. And just to kind of round things out here, I also wanted just to mention a few grants and utility incentives that commercial property owners could take advantage of that are being driven by both the state and by utility programs. So Charge Up Michigan is a grant program that is offered through Eagle. It's open to both public and private recipients. I was looking through the Charge Up Michigan program earlier, and it seems that basically one of the main qualifications is that companies would have to demonstrate significant experience installing and maintaining electric vehicle charging stations and have a significant presence in Michigan and are enrolled in a utility EV program. So the Charge Up Michigan program would be in coordination with a utility program, but it's something that customers could certainly look into. Now, if you're in consumers territory, they do have a EV rebate program that is open to both commercial and to residential recipients. And that rebate program includes up to $70,000 for companies and $500 rebate for residential customers to basically help purchase DC fast charging and level 2 charging stations. If you're in DTE territory, similarly, they also have a rebate program of up to $20,000 toward public charging. So their rebate program would basically make it so any charging would have to be accessible to the public. But residential customers can also participate in this program by installing a level 2 charging infrastructure with the agreement to also enroll in other utility programs. And last but not least, for those of you, if you happen to be in Michigan, Indiana Michigan Power, they did recently announce a pilot program that would basically help to offset EV charging loads separately from a customer's overall energy load, and basically help to keep prices down for charging electric vehicles. And my last slide here, I always want to kind of drive home the importance and the significance of why property owners, I think, should be seriously considering and prioritizing EV charging infrastructure at their property. So as we've seen, there's a lot of policy, there's a lot of market changes that are happening to rev up the advancement of EVs and EV charging infrastructure. That's also, part of the reason why I was so excited to be on this webinar today and help Lean and Green Michigan promote the idea that PACE can be used to help finance a lot of these EV charging infrastructures at commercial properties. But so number one is that the EV transition is inevitable and it's happening right now. So I would encourage all property owners to get ahead of this curve. But there's also a financial urgency, especially if you are interested in applying for grants or for utility programs. PACE will still be there, but I think that PACE is oftentimes, PACE is even better when you can combine it with other forms of financial incentives that may or may not be there years down the road too. Thirdly, I do think that the availability of EV charging increases a property's competitiveness. I think it's a good way to bring in new business, bring in customers, and also retain customers that are switching to electric vehicles. I think it's increasingly becoming a priority for a lot of consumers. And basically, having that EV charging infrastructure can make or break the success of your business or your property. And last but not least, contributing to a broader network of EV charging stations will also facilitate the use of more electric vehicles. So I think that, we're seeing a lot of ripple effects happen right now coming down from federal policy and from state policy. But it's something that is, that we will continue to see these ripple effects happen. So next slide. And that concludes my presentation. I see that James just raised his hand, so perfect timing. I don't know if we want to do questions now or hold till the end. I guess we can do them now.
Yeah, we can do a quick question now, no problem.
My question is this presentation going to be available online for us to access at a later date?
Yes, I'm going to post a recording of the presentation online.
All right. Good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
well, thank you so much, Christian. With that, we're going to hand over the floor to Todd Williams, who's going to talk about how EV charging and PACE can go together. Take it away, Todd.
Thank you, Megan, and a big round of thanks to Christian. Always great to be able to join him and get his expertise involved. We are extremely proud of the fact that the Michigan PACE statute allows for EV charging. It kind of makes us unique among a lot of the PACE statutes across the country. But we know PACE is an opportunity with EV to help what is going to be just kind of a massive uphill challenge in building out the infrastructure. It's going to be a small part. And so it was great to have Christian be able to highlight a number of the other policy measures and finance measures that are going on right now. But the great thing in Michigan is that we can do PACE for EV charging. We can do it to help meet the contribution efforts that you need in order to get some of the grants, or just to make the financial investment overall for commercial property owners. Next slide. So where we're, the other really unique thing for us is, EV charging stations count as an energy efficiency improvement. And so while it seems a little weird, maybe it doesn't fall into a renewable energy measure, it does fall under the portion of the PACE statute as an energy efficiency improvement. Installation or upgrade of electrical wiring or outlets to charge a motor vehicle that is fully or partially powered by electricity. We've used this with a number of projects already to install or to fund the installation of EV charging stations at their properties. We'll get into a few case studies later on. But it is part of the energy efficiency approach, making buildings as efficient as possible, building them for a better future and for a better building stock moving forward. It was built into the statute when it was first passed in 2010, and it looks just amazingly, far-sighted, knowing that it came in 2010 to see the infrastructure really taking off now. It's great to be able to have this as an ability. I will state, frankly, Lean Green Michigan is here to help property owners finance with PACE. I'm a huge fan of the free money and the grant programs that you can get through DTE and consumers. And frankly, I want you to borrow as little PACE as you possibly have to borrow. But I want you to know that it is there and available to help build out the infrastructure. But if there is governmental money, if there's grant money from the utilities, we definitely want to help you take advantage of that to build out the infrastructure. Next slide. So one of the questions that always comes up with PACE is the fact that the Michigan PACE statute is designed to be extremely protective of our property owners. It puts a lot of onus onto our contractors and how they design an overall project. There's a requirement within the PACE statute that when they enter into the contract, the contractor must show that the project will have a savings to investment ratio greater than 1, and that those savings will be guaranteed. Now, unlike other states where the SIR may have a sunset, our SIR currently is for the full term on an annual basis. So if it's a 20-year loan, the project needs to be designed to be cash flow positive in year 1 all the way through year 20. And that is sometimes an amazing hurdle. And we get the question, how the heck do I quantify savings to investment ratio and savings from an EV charging station? Which is an interesting question. I've seen it answered a couple of different ways on projects. Kind of three major ways to, I don't want to say get around this, but three ways to definitely think about this issue a little differently. First, projects that are below $250,000 of investment, of assessment at the end of the day, don't have a savings to investment ratio requirement. This requirement and the guarantee from the contractor start at the $250,000 level. So we've made the process easier. We've made the process a little faster. We've definitely made the process a bit cheaper for the projects below 250,000, which we refer to as our PACE Express program. Knowing that you don't have to calculate and be able to prove the savings out makes it very attractive and very easy to do in EV charging only project for commercial properties. There's a qualified technology. As long as you're below it, you don't have to worry about the SIR. And so I'd love to see that deployed for a lot of smaller projects. For the larger projects, where you get into traditional PACE above 250,000, it's always important to us that the overall project achieves the savings to investment ratio requirement. And so an individual measure may not meet the savings to investment ratio, but as long as the overall project, inclusive of all of the measures being financed, does meet it, it is fine. And so, much like, EV charging is kind of like windows in my mind. I don't know if anybody's looked to try and finance putting in windows in a 13-story commercial office building, but the amount of savings that you get is wonderful, but it is a very long payback before that really cash flows well for you, compared to LED lighting, which has a very short payback window on that. So, an overall project where this is part of the overall project makes it very easy. I have seen, not in Michigan, but I have seen a broader project where a large corporation that was putting in a sizable number of EV charging stations because they have a fleet of their own vehicles that they had just converted over to electric. I would think in that type of situation, it is very easy to calculate the amount of savings that they have because of the amount of displaced fuel that they are no longer buying. And so in that scenario, where it is a commercial property owner with a significant fleet and a significant usage of EV charging, I think it would be pretty easy to calculate a savings and be able to prove that it will meet the investment. So a couple of different ways. Don't let the SIR scare you. Feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to try and talk through what the project is and to see if we can't get EV charging incorporated within the project itself. One other possible fix, next slide. There are currently 3 bills pending in the House Bills 5011, 5012, and 5761. This is a packet of bills at this point. They will do a number of things to amend the PACE statute. I think importantly for our conversation today is it would change the level of protection baked into the bill for our property owners. We are a big fan of commercial property owners having the SIR and the guarantee requirement if they want it. We've had a number of our property owners who have undertaken projects who have asked for a way to waive it. And these House bills, if they pass, and hopefully they will, would make the SIR and the guarantee waivable by the property owner for retrofit situations. For new construction projects, the bills actually make a better or define those in a better manner, and they actually exclude them from the SIR requirements. And so for retrofits of our current building stock, the property owner would be able to waive the SIR, which certainly makes it easier to implement EV charging stations. For new construction, I got to tell you, if the SIR is not there and it doesn't create a hurdle at all, we will be encouraging every new construction to try and implement some EV charging infrastructure on site. It seems like a perfect opportunity if you're building new to build the infrastructure in right from the start. So we're hoping these bills will be taken up again and that they will move through the House and the Senate pass yet this year. If anybody ever has a question about them, I'm happy to tell you why I think they're a great idea and why you should call your House members and your Senate members and tell them that you'd like to see them move through. Next slide. Wanted to touch on a couple of the case studies. We financed, I believe, I always forget if it's 11 or 15 different EV charging stations. That number is going to go way up as we move forward. I know the Lafayette West project which closed its first financing this past year in 2021. There will be a few more phases of it. This is a planned apartment and condominium new development in Detroit. It will have 3 apartment buildings and 2 condominium buildings, and baked into this plan and building for the future is EV charging stations being built. They've implemented it with an eye for that. They want to build buildings that are going to be viable long-term, be able to attract tenants, be able to attract people to buy the condos. And one of the things that they felt were important was being able to build in the EV infrastructure right from the start. And so for this property owner, is very much kind of a look at, how do we build something that is going to be viable for the next 15, 20, 25 years? What's going to be important? And they felt that EV charging was part of it, in addition to building, with pace, building above code, making the buildings as efficient as possible. It will be a great new development in an area that has been a little vacant for a while. And so we are very excited to have them include EV right from the start. Next slide. The Henry is similar. This is a multifamily property that was built in Ann Arbor. It actually it replaced a few buildings duplexes that were in bad shape. This was built for a target audience. They were looking for kind of the new grads or grad students who were environmentally conscious, who had EV charging or EV vehicles, or potentially looking, the property at getting a vehicle that could be shared among the different tenants. And this was built, to attract a particular type of tenant in Ann Arbor. And the EV charging and the energy efficiency built into it, were married hand in hand to go after a particular market. And so, while the Lafayette West has kind of got a broader swath of everybody that they're going after, I think it's great to see multifamily being built in an environmentally conscious manner and targeting, having the EV charging as part of the infrastructure. Next slide. Of all of the EV chargers that we've helped finance, the Comfort Inn and Suites up in Clarkston, Michigan is probably my favorite one to date. The simple fact that this project was pretty well designed, pretty much complete in the design of all the measures that were going to go into it, designed and approved with zoning for how it was going to be built, and kind of at the 11th hour and just talking with the property owner, they mentioned, or they figured out that they could also have EV charging stations. It was an afterthought, but it immediately made sense to them that the ability to finance it with PACE would allow them to be able to differentiate their property from the other hotels around them. They purposely added, as soon as they figured out that they could finance it with PACE, multiple charging stations to be able to differentiate against their competition. And in preparation for this presentation, I had Megan reach out to them, and she called and pretended to be a EV charger or EV car owner looking to travel, and in talking with the property owner or talking with the front desk, it was great to hear that they get that phone call a lot. They get an awful lot of additional business because they have the infrastructure. And so, at least in the short term, as the infrastructure is still being built out, having this, especially with our hospitality properties, to be an early adopter gives you a distinct financial advantage, potentially over your competitors. It gives you a way to differentiate. And so they have seen an uptick, or at least a number of travelers staying with them, specifically because they can charge their car there. So, I'm hoping we continue to build out EV across Michigan. I'm hoping in the short term to definitely encourage it, with an eye towards, it does make great business sense for you. Next slide. So I want to thank Christian and Megan, especially for helping to pull this together, and certainly want to open things up to questions at this point. I believe I saw one pop up in the messages. Are there any considerations we need to keep in mind for LIHTC projects? We have worked, and we would love, from a PACE standpoint, to work more with LIHTC. it is a bit of an uphill challenge. I do like to say that PACE tends to play well with every other type of capital, but I understand that different types of capital will have restrictions on what they can allow within a capital stack. And so LIHTC is a little bit of a challenge still with PACE, but we're always happy to take a look at those projects and to make sure that we can play well with the capital stack and answer any questions that they may have.
Holly, go ahead.
Hi, I live up in Sault Ste. Marie, and there's not yet a lot of acceptance of renewable energy projects. How does the cost of charging, how is that calculated, and how is it paid in a commercial place like the hotels? How does that work? Or do they just charge their cars for free?
Yeah, I mean, the hotel doesn't have a meter on it, to the best of my knowledge. That is just it's kind of like the swimming pool. They're using it to attract tenants to come in or people to come in and stay. It doesn't cost that much to charge up a vehicle overnight. I do know, and it's not related specifically to their EV charging station, but because of the manner it was built, because of the additional green features, I believe they've added a green fee or an environmental fee that everybody pays when they stay there. So, I think they help to recoup their cost, not only for the EV charging stations, but the other PACE measures that they put in a little bit through that. But I've seen on a lot of properties where the EV charging is just another amenity that is going in. It's meant to.
Right. What about the public, like on the map that we saw of Michigan, and where there are going to be charging locations like along highways? How does that work? I mean, do people get to stop and charge for free, or?
I can tell you from friends of mine who have EV vehicles, I do know there are a number of places where you can plug in and it's metered, but it's not significantly different than plugging in or stopping when I stop at the gas station and fill up my tank. So it's typically cheaper for them to get a full charge than it is for me to fill up my tank. But there are certainly properties that will have charging stations that will be metered. I'm not sure with the state properties. I would bet that I can't imagine anybody's going to give the electricity away for free all the time. Fingers crossed, would be great.
Okay.
Christian, do you have any better?
I think that's
knowledge?
a good question, and unfortunately, I don't have any better knowledge in how the state is doing any form of a cost share. But I'd be curious to look more into that one, and I can get back to you if you'd like to drop me your email.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. And incidentally, I have solar panels on my roof, and I have a level 2 charger in my garage. So right now, I don't care about gasoline prices.
Wow.
Thanks.
Robert, go ahead.
Thanks, and this is directed towards Todd. I'm sorry, Todd, I didn't quite understand the scenario you were talking about with a fleet of vehicles that changed over to electric, and whether that was an actual PACE project yet, or it was just an inquiry, and whether you think, the second part of my question is whether you think that PACE is going to be a good fit just for EV charging stations for commercial property owners. Thank you.
Yeah, and Bob, that's a project in another state. They don't have such a hard SIR requirement, but the property owner was looking at it and definitely had an SIR requirement of their own from a business case to see if it makes sense to make the investment. For them, to be able to prove the case to them, the contractor that is installing it took a look at how much do they spend currently on gasoline, and it is a company that buys in bulk. They've got their own tank or their own underground storage tanks, their own pumps, and they've got their own fleet of vehicles that come in and gas up and go out. And so they've got a very known quantity of how much they're spending on gasoline, which is going to be displaced by the fact that they convert from having gasoline vehicles over to electric vehicles. And now they'll be charging them up. And so in lieu of paying for gas, they're paying now for electric, and they're charging their vehicles. And so, a similar project in Michigan, I think that's a very easy way to demonstrate that there is a clear savings because you're putting in the infrastructure. Overall, I think EV charging can be a great fit on a multi-measure project. I think it also is a very easy and great fit, in the Pace Express model.
Okay, and just one last question on the Comfort Inn. Did they come to Pace for multi-measures, or did they just have that conversation about EV and then it became multi-measure?
No, they had multiple measures. It's a new construction Pace project. They had multiple measures that they were putting in. We pointed out to them that you could finance EV charging stations as well, and they loved it and they went for it.
Great, thanks.
So there's a question from IT department that I fielded in the chat here, and the question was, are there any specific programs or grants geared toward municipal fleet electrification? And just in case you didn't see my response, I do believe that the Charge Up Michigan grant program, which is provided by Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, it's my understanding that municipal fleets do qualify for that grant program. So I would encourage you to look into more, look more into that.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a question from Timothy in the chat. He said, I live across from the Lafayette West development you referenced. We are a 164 unit neighborhood that has been designated as a National Historic Place, built in the late 50s to the early 60s. To the roads to the neighborhood are city streets. There is a high level of interest in finding a solution for EVs, but we are unsure where to start. DT, city government, what do you recommend? I don't know if that's fair, Todd.
I would recommend, one, reaching out to DT and their program to see if there's anything available. Two, I know that Wayne County, along with I think Oakland and Macomb, are currently studying EV and the need for EV infrastructure. And so, Wayne County sustainability might not be a bad group to reach out to as well, to just say, to say that you're interested potentially in finding a solution or being able to house and incorporate having EV charging on site, as they're looking to make recommendations on where to site EV charging. I think that might be a great place to start as well.
Great. Do we have any more questions?
Excellent.
All
Well,
right.
I thank everybody for attending today, and definitely thank you to Christian for being willing to participate. I'm happy to give everybody a couple of minutes back in their life. You don't have to tell your bosses this wrapped early. We're not going to rat you out. So hope everybody has a great time, and thank you all for attending.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Have a
guys.
great day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a
for
lot,
the
everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, Megan,
Yes.
in our company, Midcore EV Charge, we can provide a full EV charging station, solution. We've been involved in this since 2016, and I got a call from a gentleman by the name of Dan Gilbert.
Oh, yep.
So, I mean, we've been doing EV charging stations, both level 2s and level 3s ever since 2016.
Great.
So we're able to evaluate a site. We can also provide the network services which are needed to operate the site.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll get your contact info. What's your email so that we can be in touch?
JMV
Okay.
at mid-cour.com.
Okay, great. Well, I will be in touch with you. That is really great to know. Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.